Hey guys, Courtney here. Just wanted to jump in before I get to the content and let you guys know that I have a special webinar coming up on Saturday, November 5th, and it is about Mars reclaiming the warrior within. So, this one is going to be maybe a workshop webinar style type of thing. So, bring your charts ready. If you have questions, of course, come prepared with those. But we're going to be taking a deep dive into looking at Mars and how it will develop in our childhood, and basically how we can kind of take back where we may have been suppressed in some ways in regards to our autonomy, our will, our anger, our assertiveness, our ambition, our masculinity, our entrepreneurial self, our physical self. Those are all aspects of Mars that can be either underdeveloped or suppressed or really supported in our charts. And if you want to learn about the side of yourself and learn how to bring it into balance, then definitely check this one out. It's very near and dear to my heart, so I hope to see you there. The link for that is down below, and I hope you guys have a great day. Hey guys, this is Courtney from Lil's Boom. Today we are doing a very exciting video on planetary rulerships in astrology, which is one of the most important parts about astrology. So if you're not already using this, it is going to be a game changer for you guys. And even if you are already using this, I do suggest watching the whole video because there is an ancient astrology technique that is pretty uncommon. I really don't see many astrologers talking about it, and it's very effective and important to learn. And so I've included this also within this video, so you'll definitely want to stick around for that part. And I have some really great examples that are enlightening anyway, which should interest you guys. So basically, what planetary rulerships allow us to do is connect different areas of our life so that we can create a larger story. So just kind of like a book, how each page kind of flows into the next and the chapters come together. That is what planetary rulers allow us to do. So what are rulers? So each planet feels at home in a specific or two specific signs, and they are going to be ruling that sign. So it's just like I feel more at home in my own home. It matches my vibe. I have it decorated the way I want. And for that reason, I own this home and it's my home. I rule this home. So it's just the same with planets. They like to be in certain constellations in the sky or in certain signs because the energy of that sign tends to match the energy of that planet very well. And so they rule that sign. So for example, sun rules the sun rules over the sign of Leo, because Leo is about yourself, expressing your creative ideas, about you living your passions. And I feel like there is some egotism in Leo that is also represented in the sun. The moon is ruling over Cancer, which has to do with the mother, the family, and that's what the moon has to do with as well, and so on and so forth. So Mercury rules over Virgo and Gemini, Mars rules over Aries, and traditionally also rules over Scorpio. So when I look at somebody's chart, I will usually look at least the traditional ruler of a sign. So if I saw like Scorpio in somebody's chart, I would look to Mars to further describe that Scorpio. Or I would sometimes look at Pluto as well. So Venus rules over Taurus and Libra, Jupiter rules over Sagittarius and traditionally Pisces, Saturn rules over Capricorn and traditionally Aquarius, Uranus rules over Aquarius, Neptune rules over Pisces, Pluto rules over Scorpio. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were not visible. They're not visible to the naked eye. So for ancient astrologers, they couldn't see them. They didn't have the technology that we have today to be able to see these planets. And so the other planets took on those significations, which is why some people don't even use those planets really that much when they're looking at charts. And they will rely on the traditional rulers to explain a little bit more about that sign. So why is this important? Why does this even matter? Rulers are important because they will link different houses together. So for example, if I have Aries, if I'm an Aries rising, I have Aries at the start of my first house, that means that Mars is the planet that is in charge of this house. And so it's possible for me to link different areas of my life together if Mars is actually not in the first house, but let's say the seventh house. That's going to say something about my personality because that's what the ascendant is like. So it's about how people see me. It's my physical body, my personality type. So if I'm an Aries rising and my Mars is in the seventh house, it's going to indicate that I'm likely highly motivated by relationships. Maybe I have a career where I work one-on-one with people. Maybe I have, coping styles where I really prioritize my partnerships. There's a lot of different ways that this can result, but it's really going to change how I am as a person. So I'm not going to be like a typical Aries rising that is just kind of more so focused on themselves in a certain situation. I'm going to be very relationship oriented. So we have to kind of blend these two areas of our life together. Or it might mean that our relationships highly impact our personality. So maybe we will find certain partners that come in and kind of change who we are on a fundamental level. So it's linking the area of relationships, aka the seventh house, with the first house of self. And so it's linking houses together. I'm hoping that's making sense. And I'm going to have many examples. So if it's not, you'll see in a second. So if you want to know how well like a certain area of your life is going to do, let's say, for example, my finances. I am going to look at my second house, and I'm going to, of course, look at whatever planets are in there and see like, okay, I have Saturn there. Like maybe I won't be that rich, but Taylor Swift has Saturn in the second house. So how can I judge by that how wealthy I'm going to be? It's just not enough information. What I need to do is actually look at the sign on the second house cusp and then look at the planet that rules that sign and see what's going on with that planet. Maybe for Taylor, which I don't have her chart, I wish I could pull it up, but for Taylor, she maybe has the ruler of her second house cusp making a beautiful trine to Jupiter or Venus, planets that tend to offer good luck and abundance. And so even though you would have Saturn in the second house, it doesn't matter because your planetary ruler is having so many positive aspects. The planetary ruler of the second house has so many positive aspects that it can override whatever kind of strictness or lack that Saturn can bring into your financial life. So it's really important to see how well a house is doing or an area of your life is doing by looking at the planet that rules that house, seeing what sign it's in, seeing what house it's in, and seeing the aspects to it. Aversion, which is this ancient astrology technique, is also an important consideration to see how this area of your life is doing. However, we're going to cover that more towards the end. Okay, so here is an example of a client's chart. And this is going to bridge the areas of life between your seventh, for this person, their seventh house and their fifth house and their third house. So this person, their relationships and hobbies became a really intertwined theme. So relationships would be seventh house and hobbies would be fifth house. So when we look at their relationship planet, we know it's going to be Saturn. And why is that? Because right on the cusp of the seventh house is the sign of Capricorn. So Capricorn has Saturn as its planetary ruler. So we know his personal relationship planet is Saturn. So any aspects and signs and houses that Saturn is in is going to explain how he experiences relationships. It could even explain the kind of partners that he attracts, where he might meet his partners, what kind of relationship he tends to have with them. And then, of course, the aspects can indicate other themes and stories of other areas of his life that come into his relationships and impact them for better or for worse. So we can see that he has Saturn in the third house in Virgo, and it's making a pretty tight square to Neptune in the fifth house. So a square is an aspect of friction or tension, which is usually going to indicate that there is something that he needs to overcome in regards to this Neptune planet. So something in his relationships is being negatively affected by whatever Neptune in the fifth house means. Well, Neptune is a planet of art, and the fifth house tends to be our hobbies, and often artists will have this strongly, like planets here as well. And so this person is a musician, which makes a lot of sense with this placement. And his partners have never liked his work. They have been critical or they haven't been supportive. They felt like it was taking away from the relationship. And it was a common theme in every single one of his partners, even though they were obviously all different. It was a common theme in all of them that he would attract partners that were not on the same wavelength as him, that did not support his creative ventures, even though that wasn't his entire career. He had his own business, he had his own thing going on. But there was this natural conflict that emerges because Saturn, the relationship planet, is squaring his creative planet, his artistic planet, Neptune. And so it's showing that he needs to overcome this in his life. So he needs to learn the lesson of finding a partner who has similar interests as him. Instead, he's been attracting with Saturn and Virgo overly critical relationships or partners, and in the third house, who are likely not afraid to tell him what they think about something. And so they're kind of sharing their negative opinions about something, and it could be, a little bit daunting for his sensitive and creative side. So that's how we bridge the gap between the 7th and the 5th house, and then also a little bit the 3rd house. So now let's look at Britney Spears. So this is the theme around family and control. So if we look at Britney's 4th house cusp, her IC, we can see that she has a sign of Capricorn there. So we know that the planet in charge of her family and her home is going to be Saturn. So same like the other chart, but a totally different area that it's ruling. For the last person, it ruled the relationships. For this person, it's ruling for Britney, it's ruling her home and her family. So Saturn being your family planet could be a little bit harder. Sometimes it really depends on what's going on with Saturn. But that could already kind of present questions in my mind of what was her childhood like? Did she have to grow up quickly? And whenever I see Saturn also placed in the 1st house, I always think that as well. Somebody had to grow up really quickly, take on a lot of responsibility, either within the home or out in the world, and they had to just kind of mature faster than they would have liked to. So again, her Saturn is in Libra in the 1st house, and it's conjunct Pluto, which is a planet of control. So we can see now that her family is in the 1st house of herself and her body, and even oftentimes will be linked to your career and like life decisions and the way that you are viewed through the public lens as well. And so her relationship or her family planet is in this area of her life. So her family's already, we can see, highly impacting her body, the way that she perceives herself, as well as how others perceive her, is already going to make a big impact on this area of her life. And then on top of that, we have Pluto right next to it, which I mentioned is a planet of control. So we can tell from this that her family has now been in control over her and even her body. And we can see this quite literally. It's Saturn here is linking the 4th and the 1st houses, and then Pluto involved as well is going to tell us a story that she doesn't really have body autonomy. She does now, but she didn't for many, many years when she was in her conservatorship. She was forced to take certain medications. She wasn't allowed to get pregnant. And so we can see here some of the more challenging ways that this can be played out in somebody's life, especially because Saturn is already a little bit of a challenging planet. Pluto is as well. And so you kind of combine all these energies and you start to see how it can manifest in really intense ways. Now let's look at Elon Musk, which is a little bit more of a happy example. So Elon Musk has Aries on his 10th house cusp or his midheaven. The 10th house is your career house. And the planet that rules Aries is Mars. So we're going to understand more about kind of what he does in his career, how healthy or successful his career might be, just by looking at the planet Mars. So we can see that he has his Mars in the 8th house in Aquarius. So first of all, I'm not surprised at all to see for him Mars in the 8th house. Mars in Aquarius, because Aquarius is related to technology, to future, to progress, to invention. And we know that is basically Elon Musk's whole kind of vibe. That's really what he's doing within his career. So we can already see how his Mars is starting to explain his career a little bit more. His Mars is also in the 8th house. So Mars is actually kind of the natural ruler of the 8th house. It's a planet that's associated with crisis and kind of fighting for things. And so is the 8th house. It's power and control and crisis and fighting and all those things. The 8th house, so this is going to make a super strong Mars just already. It's like it can function pretty well in this house. It knows what it's doing. On top of this, the eighth house is related to investments, joint ventures, like basically big business. So I see in, for example, Kylie Jenner's chart, who she has a lot of money. I think her sun, or a really important planet, maybe her ascendant ruler, was in the eighth house. And you can see this in people who do start really, really big businesses, and they kind of take on investors and things of that nature. And they have a lot of responsibility over other people's money, because other people's money are invested into their company. And so, and also crisis, as I mentioned. And if you know Elon, you can definitely tell that a lot of what he's doing is planning for the future, Aquarius, and specifically for crises in the future. So maybe crises of like pollution associated with driving gas cars, as well as maybe the world going under and us having to go to Mars. Like, he's very much oriented to the future and to crisis, and that is what his career involves. So it's a very kind of literal example within his chart. On top of this, we can see that he is going to have some kind of blessing from the universe, aka he has a natal promise, which is basically like something that you can see in someone's birth chart where you can tell, okay, you're going to be rich, or you're going to be successful, you're going to have this or that. And it's because of certain things that appear in people's charts that indicate that they have certain luck. So for him, he is getting a tight trine from Venus to his Mars. Venus is one of the most beneficial planets, Venus and Jupiter. Whenever you see a positive aspect, like a trine to an important planet, like your career planet, from one of these, from Venus or Jupiter, you know that you're going to have extra luck or blessings in this area of your life. So Venus in particular has a lot to do with money, women, and people kind of looking on you favorably. So we can see that he is likely to attract a lot of money and a lot of investors, because Venus here is highly, highly supporting his career. So you can kind of see how all this plays out. Okay, now let's take a look at aversion. So aversion is another way to see how successful or how functional, that's probably a better word, how functional a certain area of your life is, or a certain house is. So if the planet that rules a house, so for example, as we mentioned with Elon Musk, Mars ruled his 10th house of career. If that planet cannot see the house it is in charge of, then it may struggle a little bit. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So when I say if they cannot see the house, what I mean is that that planet is not making any sign-based aspects, Ptolemaic aspects in particular, to the house. Then it cannot see that house. So it's basically like a teacher that is in charge of a classroom that has its back turned and is not paying attention, or a manager that never follows up with you and gives you tasks, or he's there sometimes and he's not other times, and you can tell he doesn't care, or a parent that just leaves their kids alone in the house and they just kind of have to fend for themselves. There is this energy that the planet in charge of that house is off duty, doesn't care as much, is not aware. There's something about it that's very much out of touch with its leadership and its control over that house. And again, this can have negative consequences. This could mean that you have certain areas of your life where you just lack a lot of awareness. That's typically what happens. And when you lack awareness of a certain area of your life, you lack control over it, and things tend to crop up or happen to you. And you may even sometimes feel like a victim, but it's because you're not aware of your own participation in the unfolding of circumstances that are not positive for you. And we're going to get into some examples of this. And this doesn't have to be super negative all the time, because there can be other mitigating factors in the chart that will enhance that house, that can kind of not override it, but make it have less of an impact. But aversion is an important part to consider when looking at the functioning of a certain house. And so one way to tell if you have a sign-based aspect is to make sure, okay, I guess let me do the opposite. One way to tell if there is no sign-based aspect is to look at the house that that planet rules. And if the planet is in a house that is on either side of that house or is in either side of the house opposite it, there is no sign-based aspect. And this is kind of confusing the way I'm talking about it, but let me show you with this particular image. So this is my chart. This is my second house. Whole sign houses. You actually have to use whole sign houses for aversion. I definitely should have mentioned that at the beginning. The reason being is because you need to make sure that there is one sign that starts a house. And you don't want one sign that starts and ends a house. And you can't always ensure that with the Placidus house systems. You have to use whole sign house systems, which is what they do in ancient astrology or traditional astrology. So just Google it if you're not really aware of what that is. So we can see here that I have Jupiter in my second house of finances. Jupiter is not relevant here. Or actually, I'm going to get into that in a second. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting myself confused. We can see that I have Libra on the second house cusp. This is what I meant to say. So the second house is my house of finances, and Libra is the sign that's ruled by Venus. So my goal as an individual, or my desire as an individual, is for my Venus to be able to see the second house by aspect so that I have some awareness over my finances, so that I'm not making stupid financial decisions. So I'm going to look for my Venus, and if it's in a house that is on either side of the house that's opposite the second house, or if it's on either side that's of the second house itself, we know it's in aversion. It cannot see that house. So the house that's opposite the second house is the 8th house. So this would be an opposition. This is an aspect. However, the 9th house is not an aspect, and the 7th house is not an aspect. Unfortunately for me, my Venus is in the 9th house, so that means that there is aversion taking place here. My Venus cannot see the second house. We should also look at the houses that surround the second house, so the first house and the third house. Let's say my Venus was in the third house. We would say also that it's not making an aspect to the second house, and it's an inversion to that house. So you're basically just looking for sign-based trines, sextiles, squares, and oppositions. And again, the best way to see that is to look at the house itself, the house that you're, asking about. Look to either side of that house, before it and after it. And if the planet is in either one of those, it's in aversion. It cannot see the house that's responsible for. And again, to iterate, the same thing with the house opposite it. So if the house that's opposite to the second house, the 8th house, this is an aspect, but the planets or the houses on either side of the 8th house, the 9th and 7th house, are in aversion. They're not aspecting the second house. I hope that this is making sense. I know I just said that like 3 times in a row. This is probably why astrologers don't talk about it that much, because I definitely feel like I could go into a really long, drawn-out explanation to make sure that you guys all understand it, but I don't really want to go into aspects, and I'm hoping that you will understand based off of the image itself here. So if you're listening on your phone, definitely take a look at the actual video for this one. So let's have an example to concretize this a little bit more and hopefully make more sense of it. So here we have Kim Kardashian. If we look at her 7th house cusp, she has Gemini here. What is the ruler of Gemini? It's Mercury. So we want her Mercury to be in any of the houses without an X. And that's because her Mercury should not be on the 8th or 6th houses, the houses surrounding the 7th house of relationships, which is the one that we're looking at. And it also shouldn't be in the houses surrounding the opposite house. So the opposite house is the first house. So we know ideally her Mercury would not be in the 12th or the 2nd house, or the 8th and the 6th house, as I mentioned. Unfortunately for her, she has her Mercury in the 12th house. So it is in aversion to the 7th. Her planet that rules the 7th house is not able to see the 7th house by sign-based aspect. And because of this, it is dysfunctional. She lacks awareness around her relationships. And we can really see this come out to play. This is going to be especially true because Mercury, or the relationship planet in the 12th house is already going to be hidden in some way. It's going to have secrets or confusion around it already. And then on top of that, it is an aversion. So those things kind of combine to make it a little bit worse. So we can see also her Mercury on top of all this is conjunct Uranus. So there's bringing in this element of having kind of unexpected change and suddenness and reversals in her relationships as it is. So not only does she lack awareness, but there's likely secrets, and maybe the 12th house can also be linked to mental illness. There can be secrets, mental illness, and then sudden changes in her relationships. And this is something we saw very clearly with her relationship with Kanye. She was married to him for years, supported him for years, and then never would admit that he had a mental illness, even though it got very, very apparent that he obviously did. She would, kind of go up to bat for him and act like that wasn't the case. And then he started to go completely off the rails, and they ended up separating. And so what she sees from all of this is finally all the things that were out of her awareness, which comes from Mercury being an aversion to her 7th house. Her partner, had this mental illness that she wasn't aware of or that she refused to recognize, and it led to sudden changes within her relationships. On top of this, she also married somebody called Chris Humphreys for only 72 days. So we can kind of see the erraticness and also the lack of awareness and thoughtfulness around relationships coming up there as well. So here is an example of a planet that does see the house that it rules. So you can see kind of what that looks like. This is my chart again. I am a Virgo rising. So the cusp of my first house is a Virgo. The planet that rules Virgo is Mercury. My Mercury is in the 11th house. And that means it's making a sextile, a sign-based sextile to the ascendant. So if Mercury were in the 11th house, the 10th house, the 9th house, the 3rd house, the 4th house, the 5th house, or the 7th house, it would be making a aspect to the ascendant. So, and my Mercury being in any of those planets, or your ascendant ruler, for you, if you want to look at your chart, your ascendant ruler being in any of those houses is going to indicate that the planet that rules your ascendant sees your ascendant, is in charge of it, is taking action towards what you want and what you desire. If Mercury falls in my 12th or 2nd, 8th or 6th house, it's not making an aspect to my ascendant. And that means there's an aversion here. And so if you have this, you might notice that there's a little bit more difficulty. And so the first house is super important because it's your body, it's your identity, it's the way that you see the world, it's the way that you make choices and decisions through your past lenses. And so it can be sort of like a rudder to your life and a map in some ways. So to have your planet that rules over your chart, that rules over your first house, have its back to the first house and decide that it doesn't want the map. It wants to just get in the boat and figure out how to get there on its own using its intuition. There can be some difficult outcomes from that. You can feel at times like you are not, maybe you can feel rudderless. You can feel directionless. Maybe you feel at times like you don't have as much understanding of yourself. And there can be, again, just a lack of awareness around yourself, or even sometimes your physical body. You might not know that, you have an illness for like a long time. This is probably one of the worst ways that could manifest. So don't assume that's how yours would manifest, but that's just a potential. Or you can just kind of not be aware of, how to take care of your body and things like that. So for me, because my Mercury is in a sign-based aspect to the first house and it's in the 11th, I do notice that I tend to receive a lot of emotional support from my friendships. This tends to be a really important area of my life, and they definitely help me with my sense of direction as well. Here is an example of aversion. So Billie Eilish has Aries on her second house cusp. This means that Mars is the ruler of her second house. This indicates that if she has Mars in the first or the third house, again, the houses surrounding the second house, or if she has Mars in the 9th or the 7th house, the houses surrounding the 8th house opposite the second, she will have it in aversion. Unfortunately, she has Mars in the first house in aversion to the house it rules. So the second house, especially because it is an Aries house, is related to confidence. So feeling like we are, comfortable with our sense of self, with our body, with our sexuality, kind of owning who we are. And this is something that Billie Eilish has felt really insecure about. She definitely has been fighting, kind of her own internal demons. On top of this, the ruler of her fifth house, which is Cancer, which is ruled by Cancer, the moon is in the 12th house, which is again in aversion to the fifth house. So in particular, her lack of confidence often will show up in her relationships. So she's like lacking awareness around how amazing she is. And she's also lacking awareness around her dating life. And so these are negatively influencing each other. So it's like that she will lack confidence, and she will then attract people who kind of reflect or mirror that. I know that she had a documentary out or talked about this somewhere, and she had a partner that would just like tell her that they would go to stuff and then never show up. They would never really support her, and she would allow that to happen for kind of a while until she got angry about it and stopped. But I mean, you can see that there is usually some kind of learning process that happens with aversion. Okay, I guess that might be my last example. So I hope that this was helpful for you guys. I know it's a little teeny bit confusing, but I hope that as you grow in astrology and come and watch this video back again, it's not necessarily super, super beginner, but if you are a little bit well-versed in astrology and watch this, and I hope that it was beneficial for you. If you want to learn more astrology, definitely check me out at willsboom.com. I offer an entire astrology course. And if you want a reading from me, also check me out there. And I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.